Influenza pandemics have been encountered every 30 to 40 years since the 16th century, but the world exchanged its most deadly influenza virus in the early 1900s. While the fall of 1918 would bring the Allies a victory in World War I, the spring had brought an encounter with another deadly enemy. This enemy claimed an estimated 50 million lives worldwide, more than the bubonic plague, more than World War I, more than AIDS. It required doctors, researchers, and governments to work together to exchange information regarding the virus and its spread, and to explore its causes, potential cures, and a risk of another flu pandemic. It is speculated that 2 billion people contracted the Spanish flu. The world's encounter with this deadly virus came in three waves. The first wave occurred from March of 1918 until August of that same year. While still uncertain where the Spanish flu originated, there have been several theories. The first theory explains its name. Much of the world was involved in World War I at the time of the first Spanish flu outbreak. As a result, many countries were censoring their press in an effort to control information available to their enemies. Spain, however, was neutral in the war, therefore the press openly reported news associated with the outbreak of influenza. Since this was the first place that publicly acknowledged the presence of the flu, it was assumed to have originated there, and was named the Spanish flu. Other theories credit wartime trenches in France, with their filth, disease, and damp conditions, as the flu's original breeding ground. Still others say that the Spanish flu originated in a U.S. military camp in Kansas. More recently, it has been speculated that the Spanish flu was originally encountered in China. Historian Mark Humphreys of Canada's Memorial University of Newfoundland believes that the mobilization of 96,000 Chinese laborers to work behind the British and French lines may have been the source of the virus.
Whatever the origin, the first wave of the Spanish flu received little attention. With the world's focus on World War I, the Spanish flu was considered a nuisance. The three-day fever, as it was known, was not allowed to affect daily wartime life. As a result, soldiers traveled and exchanged the virus. The second wave of the Spanish flu started only weeks after the first wave ended. This second wave, which lasted until mid-November 1918, proved to be the most deadly of the three waves. With soldiers being transported around the world, major ports such as Brest, France, and Freetown, Sierra Leone, provided places for the Spanish influenza virus to be exchanged. Freetown was a major coaling center on the West African coast, with ships stopping there when traveling from Europe to South Africa and the Orient. Infected laborers intermingled with infected troops, exchanged the Spanish flu virus, and then continued their trips to countries worldwide. The second wave of the Spanish flu was unlike typical flu viruses. In addition to affecting the young and old, the Spanish flu proved most deadly to 15 to 40-year-olds. Victims of the second wave of the Spanish flu often developed flu-related pneumonia as the victim's lungs filled with fluid, the victim drowned. Doctors throughout the world worked together to exchange information about the flu pandemic. In a report to the British Ministry of Health, Dr. Herbert French explained how contagious the Spanish flu was by saying, "In the midst of perfect health, in a community such as barracks or a school, the first case of influenza would occur, and then within the next few hours or days a large proportion and occasionally every single individual of that community would be stricken down. The patient would be seized rapidly as to be utterly unable to carry on with what he might be doing. He would be obligated to lie down where he was or crawl with difficulty back to bed." On November 11, 1918, World War I officially ended. Despite the fact that the third and final wave of the pandemic had begun to circle the globe, news of peace negotiations replaced the world's focus on the war and the Spanish flu. While the third wave of the Spanish flu was not as deadly as the second wave, it was more deadly than the first. The third wave affected more civilians than the previous two waves. As soldiers left the front and returned home from war, civilians began to encounter the Spanish flu.
So why was the Spanish flu so devastating and uncontrollable? To a certain extent, the answer still eludes scientists today. Prior to 1918, scientists worldwide explored the causes of deadly diseases such as smallpox, cholera, and the bubonic plague. In 1879, Louis Pasteur created the first live attenuated bacterial vaccine. In 1892, Dr. Richard Pfeiffer of Germany isolated a bacteria that he believed caused the flu. This bacteria became known as Pfeiffer's bacillus. In 1896, both cholera and typhoid vaccines were created. And in 1918, vaccinations based on Pfeiffer's bacillus were administered to thousands of people in an unsuccessful attempt to control the Spanish flu. Despite these worldwide efforts, scientists around the world were unable to identify the cause of the Spanish flu. Rumors began to circulate. Many people believed that the Germans had unleashed a germ as a form of biological warfare. This concern was taken so seriously that some people were afraid to take Bayer aspirin as a painkiller because it was developed by a German company. Medical experts exchanged research results and theories in an effort to better understand the disease. In 1933, in the United Kingdom, Patrick Laidlaw and his associates isolated the flu virus by infecting a series of ferrets with fluids taken from humans infected with the flu. As a result, Jonas Salk and Thomas France were able to develop the first influenza vaccine in 1938. To better understand why the Spanish flu was so lethal, a number of scientists set out to explore the Spanish flu virus found in the lungs of its victims. Kirsty Duncan of Canada exhumed bodies of Spanish flu victims buried in Norway in an effort to explore lung tissue samples from the victims. At the same time, Johann Holton and Jeffrey Taubenberger exhumed bodies of Spanish flu victims buried in Brevig, Alaska. In October of 2005, Taubenberger and his team of researchers identified the exact genetic makeup of the Spanish flu. This research allowed scientists around the world to better understand the characteristics of the Spanish flu and to explore what made it so deadly. Comparisons between the Spanish flu virus to other flu viruses encountered throughout history led Taubenberger to write, "An understanding of the origin of the Spanish flu will help scientists to better understand the conditions that bred the disease and factors that might lead to future outbreaks. The impact of this pandemic was not limited to 1918 to 1919. All influenza type A pandemics since that time, and indeed almost all cases of influenza type A worldwide, have been caused by descendants of the 1918 virus."
1945, the United States Centers for Disease Control was established in part to improve global health and strengthen surveillance and epidemiology. In 1946, shortly after the formation of the United Nations, the World Health Organization was created with the mission to promote health and control diseases worldwide. These organizations have worked together to exchange information when virus outbreaks are encountered in an effort to control epidemics before they become a worldwide pandemic. The procedures established for monitoring the world's health were tested in February of 1958 when a flu outbreak was encountered in Hong Kong. Researchers in Melbourne, London, and Washington, D.C. exchanged information regarding reports that 250,000 people had contracted a similar virus. The virus was identified as the flu. It was, however, different than previous flu viruses. Prior to this time, flu viruses encountered, including the Spanish flu, were type A H1N1 viruses. With improvements in medical technology, the new flu virus was quickly identified as type A H2N2, a variation of the Spanish flu. With the virus identified, a vaccine was created and distributed around the world. Although the H2N2 virus encounter claimed 2 million lives, the global exchange of information regarding this virus ensured that it was identified and eliminated before it could reach Spanish flu proportions. Throughout history, flu outbreaks have regularly occurred with varying intensity and magnitude. In May 1997, a young boy from Hong Kong died of a severe respiratory illness. As his illness progressed, his lungs were congested, he contracted pneumonia, fluid flooded his brain, and his organs began to fail. A throat swab taken from the young boy contained the influenza virus. Samples were sent to laboratories in London, Atlanta, and the Netherlands. The flu virus was identified as H5N1, an avian flu similar to the Spanish flu, but with a different subtype or characteristic. Since no human had ever encountered H5N1, no immunities had been built within the world's population. As a result, H5N1 virus threatened everyone. By May 2007, H5N1 had killed people in 12 countries. Organizations such as the WHO, the European Union, and the governments of infected countries worked to exchange information and identify the bird and other animal populations that carried the H5N1 virus. Steps were then taken to eliminate the virus through the slaughter of chickens and other birds that carried the virus, as well as changes to the practices and procedures used by the poultry industries in the countries that encountered this virus.
The 2014 Ebola epidemic required health organizations worldwide to explore and exchange information regarding a worldwide epidemic once more. 10 countries were infected with the Ebola virus, with almost all the cases encountered in West African countries such as Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. The World Health Organization worked with member countries to exchange information regarding the spread of its highly contagious virus. Air travel to and from infected countries was restricted, and officials from a number of countries sent medical personnel and supplies to support the infected countries and their people. The encounter with Ebola was the most recent and best example of how the lessons learned from the Spanish flu have allowed the world to monitor and react to worldwide health crisis. The World Health Organization has called the Spanish flu the single most devastating infectious disease outbreak ever recorded. World War I and the Spanish flu left families destroyed and economies suffering from labor shortages. Today, greatly due to the world's encounter with the Spanish flu, countries worldwide work with the World Health Organization to monitor and track the outbreak of flu and other viruses. While an action plan exists to isolate and eliminate viruses in a timely manner, many countries do not participate in this information exchange, thus limiting the WHO's effectiveness in this area. The World Health Organization receives information about influenza virus cases from 120 global surveillance network stations. In 2004, the WHO stated that while 84 countries exchange information through these influenza watch efforts, 100 countries do not.
Other challenges exist in controlling the exchange of disease worldwide. Since the flu virus changes annually as a result of antigenic drift, new vaccines must be developed each year. Only the US and Canada encourage all individuals older than 6 months to get an annual flu vaccine. In many countries, only doctors are allowed to give flu shots, thus making the shots more expensive and less available. Many of the world's poorer nations do not have the ability to provide the vaccines, antibiotics, and medical professionals required to handle a virus outbreak of any size. In addition, ease of air travel increases the likelihood of viruses worldwide.
So, what can we do? We can do our part by getting an annual flu shot. Do it for yourself. Do it for your mom. Do it for the world.
I had a little